looking at here is a national security state. It's the classic national security state, and we've all been tutored on it. We know what it looked like in the Third Reich. We knew what it looked like under Beria and Stalin, in Russia. We know what it looked like under the Shah of Iran. We know what it looked like under Somoza, under Noriega. We know what all those, and the bizarre part of it is that half of them we support. And the other half Russia supports, or China, and so that they've all got the same game. And they're always trying to assert that some poor, helpless spy who happens to be over in their country, doing exactly what we would execute someone for doing here against us, is in danger if you publish this story, which just happens to turn out to be mortifyingly embarrassing to us, and so it just isn't true, and and I know it isn't true.
I would imagine a lot of the times it's not true. I just do wonder sometimes about the times it is, and maybe when it's not, like just a spy or something like that, but there's actually, there could be diplomats or things like that. But you're right. It goes to that 1% kind of theory of like, well, if there's a 1%, someone's going to die. You wouldn't want to do this, right?
That's Dick Cheney's theory.
Exactly.
The 1%.
The 1% doctrine.
Yeah. If there's a 1% chance, we have to just conduct ourselves. That's the absolute authoritarian masterpiece.
Yeah.
If there's one chance in a million that you've got a nuclear bomb hidden in your basement, we have to go find it.
Yep.
And you say, well, how about getting a warrant? We don't have time for a warrant. We don't have time for a warrant. Go. Any magistrate will give you a warrant. No, we don't have time. We're gonna have to come into your house right now. And if we happen to find something else while we're looking for the nuclear bomb, like a whole ounce of marijuana in your dresser.
Marijuana. You're getting arrested.
It just happens to be, we're just going to bring that right in, so it's, there's no doubt about what is this going on. And so that right from the very beginning, my constitutional law professor is Lawrence Tribe, and they say, that right from the very beginning, you have to understand that the government of the United States as constituted is without authority to do those things.
No.
They don't have the authority to do it. They think that they're like kings and queens that are endowed with kind of sovereign authority that they get from the infinite and eternal, that authorizes them to do whatever it is they think they need to do at any given point in time. But that just isn't true. The entire theory of our government is exactly 180 degrees the opposite of that. If they run into trouble and not being able to, for example, secure their continued privileged access to the strategic raw materials of another country, which they view to be of a national security interest themselves. That's too bad. That we had made an agreement at the very beginning that they're going to have to forego some of those privileges, of the sovereign. They're just not going to get to do it. They aren't going to just to go into your house. They aren't going to get to, tell you what to do. They aren't going to get to tell you what to think. They aren't going to get to tell you what to read, even though they always want to.
Right.
Always want to, is part of the bureaucratic imperative of any national security state, and so that's what you face all the time. And so all you have to do is say to them, prove it, and they never will. And that's exactly what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with the whole UFO thing. Oh, we can't reveal to you the secrets, because it would be catastrophic. The catastrophic disclosure, that's the big, the trigger word now. We can't allow the information that we know about the UFOs to be revealed to the public because it would be catastrophic. And you say, like what? I'm sorry, we can't tell you because that's really national security, And I say to them, you're making a big mistake here because I will find out.
Danny Sheehan's going to come get him.
I will find out. That's our job. We've done that historically. You've said that we can't find out. We can find out. We will.
You know what part of the problem is, though? Because we'll get into it today with some of the other cases as well as we go along here. But you have found out things, allegedly, of some of the wildest secrets that have happened in this country, and you shout it from the rooftops. But there's so much noise around these events because that's what the people who don't want anyone to know about it do. They create noise with it.
Sure.
That what may be truths in some case get lost in that noise, and people continue on with their lives.
Yeah, you do what you can do. You try to share with people that we believe in the principles of the First Amendment. And that that the cure for lying is telling the truth. And you tell the truth when you have an opportunity to do so. You try to make opportunities for you to do so. that will fly all the way here into New Jersey and come on shows to talk to people and say, oh, look at, that you need to listen. There's information that you don't know. And now what's happened, of course, is we have like probably two entire generations younger than the boomers now who disbelieve almost everything that the government tells them. And I must say we've contributed to that particular state of mind considerably down through the 50 years that I've been working on these cases, because I think that's a healthier disposition than just believing blindly in what they say.
Agreed.
Because they have abused that so many times. And it's been demonstrated that they've abused this over and over again, that they lie to us, they lie to Congress. Congress knows they're lying to them, and they let them get away with it. We have examples like with Don Frazier. Don Frazier was the congressman from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
I don't remember this.
And he's sitting in a budget committee hearing in the House Appropriations Committee, and they're reviewing the CIA budget. And he says, what's this item here about miscellaneous interrogation equipment? And the CIA person says, oh, well, that's like lamps and tables and chairs and stuff like this. And he says, well, what's this item here about thumb screws? Bango! It was over. His whole political career was over. Millions of dollars comes pouring in mysteriously into his congressional campaign in the next term, and he's ousted. Frank Church, who chaired the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Very next election, people out he goes. Very next election after he chaired the Church Committee, because all of a sudden millions of dollars comes flowing into his campaign up in Idaho for the United States Senate seat, which he'd had 2 full terms, with like 70% election. All of a sudden, millions of dollars comes in, publicizing the fact that he supports the Equal Rights Amendment for women, and that he supports background checks on handguns, and so he was out. And we tracked that money that came out of the Nugan Bank in Australia. It was money that was put in there from the Nugan from the purchase of heroin in Southeast Asia by the Southeast Asian station chief, a CIA station chief, Theodore G. Shackley, the station chief in Saigon, had a partnership with Vang Pao of the heroin smuggling. And a share of that money was put into the Nugan Bank. That money came out of the Nugan Bank, went through 2 South African banks into the campaign against Senator Church up in Idaho. Same thing happened to Dick Clark in Iowa. Senator Dick Clark in Iowa, who opposed the covert operations of the CIA in Africa. All of a sudden, millions of dollars shows up in the campaign against him, and he loses his Senate seat. Okay, I mean, people know this. This is as dark as you can imagine. The Central Intelligence Agency's Operations Directorate, the guy that ran that, handpicked Theodore Shackley, the same guy who had the contract with the heroin smuggling in Southeast Asia, handpicked by George Bush Sr. to be the director of covert operations worldwide for the Central Intelligence Agency under George Bush when he was the director of the CIA under Gerald Ford. We know these things. We tell people these things. People don't pay a lot of attention to it because they're very busy. There are football games to be monitored, and elections to be monitored, and other things, getting and spending, laying waste to their power. And these things go on under the radar. Our job is to try to make it public. And what we do is we think of different ways of communicating this to people, along with the evidence to prove that it's true, so that if they're interested, they can watch. Now, one of the challenges is that the public school system that we have, trains people from the time you're in preschool, basically, to believe whatever the people in positions of authority tell you.
Yes.
Here's your school teacher. You have to do whatever it is they say. They're here to help you. Here's Mr. Policeman. We're going to have him come in and give you a lecture about how he's going to help show you across the street to be safe. And you're supposed to respect. Here's Mr. Fireman who's going to, blah, blah. And these people in positions of authority that you're supposed to believe what they say. Now, there was a whole period in time in our history when we all thought, well, that's cool. we can depend upon these people. They're trustworthy people. You know, I was sort of the last full generation of kids who were raised to believe that, you know, and then all of a sudden they started drafting us by the tens of thousands, you know, to go into Southeast Asia, to be, you know, assaulting people, you know, and killing women and children and stuff and burying them with your chute, you know, things like that. You know, they used up their goodwill with us. And it became clear to us that the blind trust that we had placed in the government institutions was misplaced. And it turns out, lo and behold, you're taught that, you know, at least subversively. You know, you're taught, well, there's the Constitution, and you're not supposed to just blindly believe your government. You know, we're different than kings and queens. You know, they don't have the right just to do whatever it is they want to do. Here's all your rights and all that. And so that we have this opportunity here in the country still to lift up that element of our knowledge about free rights and independent liberties, et cetera. So our job is to try to help get people to understand that and to reify those things and to do it under duress, not just when it's comfortable or it's the cool thing to do, but to really resist, you know, the narrative of the government. And so that's why we have such strange bedfellows. We have people all across the political spectrum now, you know, from the right to the left, all the way across the political spectrum, who say, you know, Sheehan, you know, will tell you the truth, you know, and whether you're on the right or whether you're on the left or you're in the middle, wishy-washy people, you know, listen, and he'll tell you what the story is, and then we'll also give you an analysis of what your options are. You know, in light of this historical record, here's what we think that it tells you, and here's what the options are you have. You don't want to jump out of a first-story window or set your own hair on fire. You know, what you want to do is do something that is meaningful and not useless stuff. You know, just, you know, pick up a picket sign and walk around in front of the White House, something all by yourself. You know, what you need to do is organize, mobilize, educate people, you know, get people to respect the rights that they have and know that they should exercise those, and be willing to take some flack. You know, be willing to get resistance from your family, you know, from your friends. You know, you've got to be willing to stand up for what you believe. Yeah. And you need to be careful about not believing just any Tom, Dick, and Harry, you know, that comes down the path. You know, do you get all these QAnon stuff and, I mean, kind of really bizarro stuff, you know, oh, you know, they've got hundreds and hundreds of children under the streets of New York City being kept in tiger cages and tortured and extracting, you know.
I feel like that's an op. Just to get people to not talk about these things, because it's like, oh yeah, the crazy people were talking about that, and then the things that might actually be real get ignored.
They love to raise up and identify, you know, bogus conspiracy theories, so that they can suggest that anything that's a conspiracy theory is untrue, you know, and that's what they do, and we know that the operations director of the Central Intelligence Agency has an entire project that they call citizen diplomacy. And what they do is public diplomacy, and they actually engage in propaganda narratives that they plant in the newspapers and in media.
Do you have examples of this?
Yeah, that, for example, the Bay of Tonkin resolution. Oh, we were attacked on the high seas, and here's all the stuff. You know, that Saddam Hussein has nuclear weapons. You know, and he's going to be. You know, they're going to bomb the United States. You know, that they one time after another. You know, that they just come up with these narratives. And the thing is that you have to push back against them. And the problem is that they're extremely sophisticated. What they've done is they've developed these techniques to engage allegedly in international warfare against allegedly the communists that are trying to take over the world, you know? And so therefore they've developed all of these skill sets. And what they do is they turn around and they deliver them against us, the citizens here. You know, you've got Project Mockingbird. You know, they got 42. We identified 42 specific national security reporters. You know, who all come from a national security background as a rule. They've all been in one of the agencies or another, and that's why they're there at the news media, because they've got good contacts with the people.
But Danny, they would never do this today.
Yeah, that's right.
They would never do this today.
I'm glad they've stopped. We've never done this. Besides, we don't do this anymore. You know. So that is what. So it's just a peculiar practice that I've developed over the years because of the happenstance of the early cases that I did.
Yes.
That people tend to think of calling us. And I've made sure to have an institute that has got a standalone capacity that just gets $25 contributions from people across the country.
Institute.
This is the Romero Institute now. It was Christic to start with. Yep. But of course, George Bush Sr. ordered the revocation of our 501c3 tax-exempt charter for the Christic Institute.
Why would he do that?
Because we're the ones that did the Iran-Contra case against them.
Oh,
we're the ones that filed the Federal Criminal Racketeering Act charges against Oliver North and all of the people working with him in the off-the-shelf enterprise. And Reagan and Bush kept insisting that there was no evidence whatsoever to support the assertion that they were providing weapons to the Contras, in violation of the Bole Amendment. And we said, oh, really? Okay, we take a look at this. So what we did is we began to assemble all the information. We ended up having, the tail numbers on their airplanes they were flying. We had the serial numbers on the weapons. We had the code words that they would use to land. We had the landing strips where they were landing them. We had photographs of them unloading the weapons and stuff and loading the cocaine onto the same airplanes at Ilopango. And we had gotten the photographs from the head of the DEA. The Drug Enforcement Administration, right at Ilopango. We had these things completely dead to rights. And I had the whole memo, for example, with the place where they were bringing the cocaine in on a particular shipment with this thing called the Refrigerafico de Punta Arenas, this refrigerated shrimp boats. They were bringing the cocaine in. We knew the house where they were delivering it. We had the address of the house. We had the unlisted telephone number of the house. We had the code words you used to call to be able to get access to the house. We knew that it was Gambino's daughter that was running the particular facility. I go to the head of the DEA strike force in the Drug Enforcement Administration in Washington, D.C., sit in the office with him with one of his best friends sitting right next to me, as our additional source. And I pushed the memo across the desk to him, and he reads through the thing, and he pushes it back to me, and he said, look, Danny, you know what this is, and so do I. I plan to live to see my retirement.
Oh. Oof.
That's what this is about. That's how deep this stuff goes. The national security state views themselves as being authorized to terminate anyone who crosses them if they believe that it's a deep and dark enough secret that they want to keep secret. And they believe they're authorized to do that because they believe they've been authorized to terminate people outside of the country. Yeah. And once you do that, once you loose that beast, that beast will come home to roost, historically, always. And it's a tragic mistake that was made, with the National Security Act of 1947 to invest this erstwhile simple intelligence community, with the authorization to engage in covert operations, or what they call kinetic activities.
All right, question there though, because I agree that our three-letter agencies have gotten out of control. I agree that we can point to the beginning of their history to see it happened right away. It actually happened before they existed as well. We'll get to that later as well. Right. So as far as like shitting on the bad things they do, we have to do that. We've done that on the show. We'll continue to do that. If they didn't exist though, and they didn't have the ability to do some level of covert operations, wouldn't we be in an enormous disadvantage to the world that's also ruled by places that literally are dictatorships and things like that have no rules?
Well, that you'll find that any of those that constitute any kind of a threat to us at all have been usually generated by us. We're the ones that is. The fact that people now, right now, I'll guarantee you, if there's 750,000 people listening to this particular broadcast, that there probably aren't. You can count on one hand, probably the number of them that realize that our United States Secretary of State. What was his name? Robert Lansing,
1918?
In 1917, actually early 1918, actually, mounted a foreign military expeditionary force to go into Russia to knock out the government of Russia the Bolshevik Revolution that overthrew Tsar Nicholas II. Tsar Nicholas II was an out-and-out authoritarian, royalist king in Russia, who was an ally in World War I. And when the Bolshevik Revolution rose up in October of 1917 and overthrew him and established the Bolshevik government, the United States Secretary of State, mounted a foreign military expeditionary force and sent them into Russia to try to kill that administration in the cradle. Period.
How were they going to do that? This is like 1918. They taking like a boat with Viking ships
full,
there?
Full military expeditionary force. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the fact is that virtually nobody will tell you about that. Nobody will train you to know about that in high school. Nobody will train you in college. You can take all the history courses basically you want, but unless you specialize in Russian history, you'll never find that out. And so then you say, well, look, why did the Russian Bolshevik government adopt the attitude that it did toward the United States government right off the start? That's the answer to it. And when you say, okay, Robert Lansing, who's Robert Lansing? The Secretary of State under Wilson, right? Turns out he was the son-in-law of John W. Foster. John W. Foster was the grandfather of John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles.
Yeah, great guys.
John W. Foster was the guy that was in charge of he was the Secretary of State in 1893 when we invaded the Philippine Islands and started to instigate the Spanish-American War, the whole age of American imperialism. That was John W. Foster. Okay, and he's the father-in-law of Robert Lansing, who was the guy who sent the expeditionary force into Russia.
It's nice of them to keep it in the family.
And if you keep track of all of this, if you actually look at it historically, you start to discover, what the background of this is, and you discover, for example, that in 1918, at the end of World War I, right, the Versailles Treaty is set up. And it turns out that the two grandchildren of John W. Foster, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, both young lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell, are brought with their uncle, Robert Lansing, Secretary of State, brings them to the Versailles Treaty agreements in Paris. They draft into the Versailles Treaty the reparations requirements. Imposing upon Germany a burden to repay the corporations for the damage they'd inflicted on any of their corporate properties during the war, right? And since they didn't have the funds to actually pay those reparations, what they did is Brown Brothers Harriman, the legal counsel for whom was Allen Dulles, they agreed to give loans to the German government to be able to pay the reparations, in exchange for which they took stock in their major war industries. The Krupp ball bearing factory, the IG Farben pharmaceutical and explosives companies, all those major industries. And then the investors in Brown Brothers Harriman actually invested money in their war industry. Okay, to rebuild their war machine at the end of World War I. They're the ones that rebuilt the entire German juggernaut under Hitler. And the CEO of Brown Brothers Harriman, who had forwarded all these loans, the CEO of Brown Brothers Harriman is George Herbert Walker.
Oh, my God.
You don't have to call him that, but it was close. But George Herbert Walker is the CEO of Brown Brothers Harriman. His son-in-law is Prescott Bush.
Who becomes Hitler's financier.
And what happens is George Herbert Walker steps out in 1924 from the CEO position at Brown Brothers Harriman, creates the Union Bank of New York. And it's all capitalized by investors from Brown Brothers Harriman, who are all the major robber barons. All those guys that owned, the Carnegie and Rockefeller and Harriman, the rail lines. They owned the agricultural lines. They owned the steel mills. They owned they had monopolized basically the top 15, 20 areas of the American economy. And they had all the funds, and what they did is they capitalized the Union Bank of New York. The Union Bank of New York sets up a subsidiary up in the Netherlands called the Bank of Shipping and Commerce. This guy, Fritz Thyssen, runs the bank for them, and they finance the construction of the international headquarters of the Third Reich. Okay, and they set up the entire Third Reich to become the bulwark against Bolshevism in Europe. That's their whole job.
Yes.
And that they financed the whole rise of Hitler. In fact, in the meeting on January 3rd, 1933, when Adolf Hitler is made the Chancellor of Germany,
Right.
sitting in the meeting is Alan Dulles,
Yep.
legal counsel for Brown Brothers Harriman, and insisting that he sign an agreement being willing to accept the burden of paying the reparations agreement if he's going to be made the chancellor to protect those loans that they have given to them. And
that he created.
so there they are.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what I'm saying is that nobody's going to tell you that. Nobody's going to tell you that in high school civics because it'll undermine your blind faith in the legitimacy of the activities of the United States government. Because they discover that the behind the scenes in the United States government is this elite, less than 1%, 1/10 of 1% of the population who own massive amounts of stocks and securities in the major corporations are the ones that are calling the shots on these things. Okay, and the problem is that when people start to find out a little bit about this, they throw up their hands in despair and say, "Oh, this is absolutely atrocious. This is as bad as I've ever heard it is. There's no use in voting. There's no use in trying to do anything. Let's just relax. Let's smoke some dope, get laid, listen to good music. Dance and play, go to raves. And in despair, basically. And you don't have to do that. You just have to pay more attention. Yeah, it's a burden to have to figure this stuff out, to keep track of it. But there are people who will help you, like this, like your radio station. You heard this thing. You'll just keep people informed about things. And there's this great movement going on now with all the podcasts and stuff like that, where people can come on and tell you the details. We're not just throwing general smoke at you here. We're saying here are particular names, times, places, dates. You can check these things out. And fortunately, still, may not be permanent, but still, access to the internet, you can start looking up these facts. And you can find these facts.
Obviously there was the falling out with JFK and Alan Dulles where he fires Alan Dulles, and then Alan Dulles effectively runs the CIA from his Georgetown, townhouse or whatever.
And then you may have all seen this picture of the G engines are coming in 56 in Young Men magazine, and mentions of Glenn Martin, which we'll talk about more, and the other key people, including Clark Electronics Labs at the end. But I'll mention that this guy Michael Gladwich that wrote the article was a World War II fighter ace in Poland, then France, then in the UK, and was injured, but very much plugged into the entire aerospace world in a detailed way in these 50s time frame, and participated in a lot of behind the scenes meetings. And to my surprise, he wrote a book on Admiral Byrd on Antarctica. For those that are following the mysteries of aliens in Antarctica, but I find that interesting as sort of a plausible connection. Next slide. And here we get to the mother lode, in my opinion. This is the Glenn L. Martin starts this Rias group. Walcom Bender was the leader at the time. But he starts it in 55, and all these super powerful, heavyweight theoretical physicists and mathematicians are working hard at trying to figure out gravity and gravity research. Lewis Witten has got videos about bismuth magnesium, and people recognize Rudolf Kalman for the electronic Kalman filters, but ... I've requested FBI files on a lot of these people, and we'll talk more about George Trimble in a little bit, a few slides later, and his involvement with Lockheed Martin's. So in the next slide, we'll also talk about in the 1960s, NEPA was canceled, nuclear propulsion of aircraft. Why did they do it? Maybe they figured out gravity, or they decided, well, there's lots of potential reasons why you wouldn't want to have a flying nuke around. Um, but the newspaper articles on gravity stop, and there's the counterintelligence effort probably to squash them or not support them. Um, you know, NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance, is transitioned from sort of a pure research mode, which Asloff and others will highlight, to more technology focused, where let's just make an MRI machine to do something. And then, as Hal Puthoff and others, and Tim no doubt understands, that string theory kicks off in '68 as a potential cover story for how to push the mainstream physicist down a track that's a dead end or a mildly useful end. Um, so anyway, I'm just sort of commenting on that. And the next slide. Um, and then you may have all heard about Ben Rich's efforts at the Lockheed Skunk Works for 15 years. But I'll pull you to the third bullet. Is that there's an error in the equations, and we figured it out, and we know how to travel to stars, and it won't take a lifetime. When I think error in the equations, I think these are human beings figuring out errors, and GR is not correct, and they fix that, or Maxwell's equations are not correct, or the combination of the two, or scalar functions are not correct somehow, and so they figured it out. And I don't think the ETs are giving them equations they wouldn't quote figure it out. They would just be given the equation. So anyway, I find that highly suggestive that it was us that figured out how gravity works, rather than some sort of celestial gift from others.